That's a good question. It's sort of generic and general in nature, and to be expected. It's naturally comes from Fitra, especially from people who are not academically trained. What's this all about? Well, um, I was really surprised when I first started listening to Dr. Hany. And after just a very short while, I think 2 or 3 days of sporadically listening to bits and pieces, I decided to listen very attentively and systematically. And that was about a month ago. And ever since then, Sister Amina and I have been almost on a daily basis, perhaps even 2 or 3 times a day, depending on the time and opportunity between our responsibilities. We've been studying him very avidly. And so far, I haven't come across anything that I object to. But, and there's always a but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says. There's been just a couple of small things that I didn't agree with, but that's only because any one of us, including Dr. Hany, has a knowledge deficit in any given discipline, So people, if you have a knowledge deficit, then there's something missing in your ability to synthesize the knowledge and then approach a Tawheed synthesis. And I notice when I listen to Dr. Hany that the things he doesn't know, I know. You see, so my knowledge and his knowledge, very much like what I expected to happen or hoped would happen with Imran Hussein or Sheikh Belash, was to have someone who could complement the knowledge that I have of the occult world and history with Quranic knowledge, you see. But the approach that Imran Hussein, he has a sort of an approach which is somewhat systematic, and it's not as thorough as Dr. Hany's is, but it approaches that, and it's much better than most other commentators I've met, most other scholars. Now that brings us to this word academic, because we always associate academic with scholars, and they're not necessarily synonymous. See, academics take a systematic approach, which is based on some sort of scientific discipline. What I've noticed since, and I suspected this before I listened to Dr. Hany, was that Muslims have no scientific approach. They base their what they call so-called Islamic science on the science of the Hadith, and yes, that is a scientific approach of a certain nature, but it's limited, you see, and you can't really call it a science, except that it has a methodology, and the methodologies that was applied is the same methodology that you would apply to any detective would apply to hearsay evidence, you see, because there's no real evidence, you see, involved in the hadith. So if there's no real evidence, then there's no real science. You see, there cannot be any real methodology. If you want to call it a methodology, it's the methodology of gossip. He said that she said that they said that they heard somebody else say, you see, and that's covers a period of 200 to 300 years in a gap between our beloved messenger and prophet Muhammad wasallam and when the first hadith were written down. Now, there must have been some hadith written down during his life, but he told people not to do it if the hadith is to be believed, you see. So this is not really a scientific method. It's a careful listing of hearsay, is what it is, but it's not science. And people have been calling this Islamic science. They've been calling Sharia Islamic science. I attended Islamic science conferences for 2 to 3 years running, if not more, when I was an academic amongst the alim in Malaysia, and there was no science present. I wrote a book on Islamic called Islam Under the Shadow of the New World Order. There are no scientists at these conferences, none. You see, so what I suspected Dr. Hany is proving. You see, that the methodology that was used is just a hearsay methodology, and it was applied to the tafsir. Inasmuch as, and I suspected this as well, but I had no proof. I'm not an Arabist. I'm not a linguist. If I try to study Arabic, it just dumbfounds me. I don't. That part of my brain just doesn't work. And if you were take 10 males, out of any 10 males, you'll find one, maybe two, or 1.5. You see, that has a gift for language. Okay. I don't have that gift, and I'm too old a dog to be trained in a new language. So I suspected there was something wrong all along for several reasons, and I won't go into all of them. But when I presented the first scientific paper at an Islamic science conference and was called on the red carpet for it, I said, okay, something's very wrong. The dean of the institution called me on the red carpet. I presented the science of the differentiation of the brain into male and female brain types. And this accounts for homosexuality and lesbian sexuality. This has been known for 50 years, but nobody talks about it, you see. I presented the science. The audience was almost entirely Muslim, then they were split right down the middle, 50% in favor of the paper and 50% against it. Now, I found that interesting, but my dean was absolutely against it. When he called me on the carpet the day or two after the conference had finished, it was a weekend conference at ISTAC about 14 years ago now. There were 3 of my colleagues, and they were all my superiors with respect to longevity and superiority in the institution. They were all Islamic scholars. One of them was the director of research into Islamic sciences and other scientific efforts, and they all supported my paper going into the conference, each one of them privately. But when the dean called me on the carpet, not one of them opened their mouth. And I sat there and looked at it myself. What cowards they are. So this is evidence of what's been going on in Islam for, well, at least 1,200 years. I don't believe the first Sahaba were like this. But after Muawiyah won what Muhammad had fought against, Muawiyah was of the Quraysh, and he took back everything that Muhammad had fought against and reestablished the kingdom of man rather than the kingdom of Allah on the throne of Islam, a hereditary monarchy. This is not Islam. And I objected to this all along from day one when I joined the faculty, and no one wanted to discuss the matter. No one wanted to discuss the matter. So there's a political motivation here, and it's the motivation is basically this: save your butt. Okay, I could use a different word there, but I'm trying to be polite. So I saw it in action 1,200 years later. 1,200 years later, you see. And it happens anywhere in any kind of situation socially, politically, where you have a power between those who hold the political power. You have a struggle between those who hold the political power and those who want to hold the truth and know the truth. You see, so those three gentlemen who held back their opinion and held back their support for my position on their paper, which was real science. Okay, mind you, they're cowards. And for this reason alone, they didn't want to lose their pension. They didn't want to offend the dean. They didn't want to. And why did the dean object? Well, I'm going to tell you this right now, and this goes on the official record, if this is ever published, you see, as his son was overtly effeminate. And he did not want to admit to this fact, according to the scientific evidence that I presented him. And everyone at that paper. Now, my new book, Sexology, presents this paper, but in a much more sophisticated and systematic manner. Okay, and of course, it's not just a 20-page paper; it's a 450-odd page book, which explains everything as far as I can possibly explain it in a synthesis, in a system of Tawhidic synthesis, bringing in as many disciplines as possible to focus on the matter in hand, which we're talking about is the importance of marriage and the assault of marriage by the LGBT community in this day and age. You see, and why it's happening. So I talk about it from many different perspectives. Nobody amongst the Islamic ulama are discussing these matters. And these are very significant matters. Almost no one is discussing true science. They're putting up a facade of what they call Islamic science, okay? And you've got all of these various Islamic disciplines. And what have they been doing? They've been establishing their own systems that protect their own faculties, okay? Their butts as authorities. All right, that's what they've been doing. So they've established themselves as oh my God, dare I say it, an intermediary between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via the Quran. Dr. Hany's work is erasing that priesthood. He's wiping it out, and he's doing it in a very systematic manner. I have now been listening to him, and I'm filled with admiration for his expertise, for his diligence, and for his ability to explain himself and his method. This thing he calls the Abrahamic locution is not new to me, not at all. I knew about it before I ever heard of Dr. Hany, because I studied Al-Torah, and I used it to remove the confusion. I used it to remove the corruption, because the basic message of Al-Torah is still there. It's still there. It's hidden. And if you use the Abrahamic locution in Al-Torah, which has parallels with what is in Al-Quran, you can discern what is truth and what is a lie. But it's not for the common person on the street, not at all, you see. So his academic position is very, very strong. People who adhere to the traditional position will argue with that, but that is because they have a bias. They have a confirmation bias because they have not established any systematic approach to the study of the Quran, and they have just listened to traditions which were handed one to another, to another, to another for 1,200 years now. We don't know really what was handed during that 200-year period between the death of the Prophet and the first tafsir. We don't know. That's a mystery period there. And I know from history that the various powers that be in any empire, in any kingdom, if they have usurped the throne or if they have taken the throne by force, they always change the history and they always change the doctrine of the given religion that is holding the group's feeling together in whatever the culture is. And they do this for political purpose. This is an established scientific fact of history. So that this would happen in Islam is no surprise to me. It comes as no surprise to me at all. I just didn't have anybody until Dr. Hany to confirm what I already suspected. See? So that's my initial response to your question, dear sister. All right. Anyone else have another question? Yes, go ahead.
Omar says that Dr. Hany does not believe in the prophet. Prophet something. I can't read what that says. What's your thoughts on that? Perhaps there's confusion about the definition. Perhaps there's something that has been misread, or not enough information has been reviewed.
Well, you see, there are different offices. There's the office of the messenger who just brings the message, and there's the office of the Nabi who has something to do. Prophet Muhammad had held both offices. He was both the messenger and he was the Nabi. But these jobs were given to him at different times in the development of his own life and biography and history. In other words, when he was a child, he wasn't already a prophet. That didn't happen right away. He wasn't a messenger. There was no messenger. There was no message when he was a child, you see. So he was not a messenger until the messenger brought it, until Jibril began to dictate the message and had him read, you see, the Quran. Then, after the Hijrah, he was given a new task, and that task was to establish the kingdom of Allah as a political entity. And this was a promise that was given to Ibrahim. And if you read Al Torah correctly, you see this promise very, very clearly. And the promise was given only to what we call the promised land. That is the land between the Euphrates and the Nile. Okay. So when he did that, he completed that task after establishing the Medina constitution when he then entered Mecca. And that was the end of his. There was one more campaign he did after that, was the Tobruk campaign, and then after that he left. He left us. He died, and his office as Nabi was ended. So at that time he was both messenger and Nabi, because the Quran kept on coming, you see, for a period of 21, 23 years or so. So it's not that Dr. Hany disagrees with him being a prophet. It's just that he's being more scientific and methodical about the terms. And this is the job of a scientist who is given the task of adab. And adab is to call something what it is, not to just romantically assume that he was always a prophet and he was not capable of making mistakes. He certainly made mistakes, but not with the message. You see, that's the difference. And there's this religious idea that prophets can't make mistakes and that they're all saints and they all have a certain obvious and they're sort of almost pseudo deified. And this is wrong. This is just a wrong take, because these people, whoever they were, well, of course we hold them in high regard, and we're especially grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having them administer their task to us, each and every one of them. We make no difference between any of them, you see. But people since the death of the prophet began to do what every other faith has done after the death of their prophets as well. They begin to sanctify these people and pseudo deify them. Some people actually deify them. Odin, for example, was deified, you see. And there are other examples of such things. I'm sure that Krishna, whoever he was a prophet who was deified after his death, you see. And then what happens after they're deified? The people who want the political power, they step in and they start interpreting things in a manner which allows them to hold office. And they create an institution out of this office. And it's always a kind of a priesthood. There's no exception to this rule. It's always a kind of a priesthood who acts as an intermediary between men and God. And so I'm sure that's what happened to our beloved prophet after his death, after Ali was murdered and all the righteous caliphs were murdered. I mean, this is no accident of history. This shows that there was a force involved, a political force involved, that was determined to undermine Islam from the very beginning. And they succeeded. And they succeeded spectacularly after modifying the interpretations of the Quran and the translations of the Quran in a way that would favor whatever the dynasty was that was established. And ever since that happened, you had a game of keeping up with the Khans. Okay, I call it keeping up with the Khans. So that these little princes who considered themselves Muslim caliphs here, there, and everywhere just used scholars to support their position and to support their political position, no matter where they were going, and under no matter what the conditions, and no matter what the atrocities were committed. You see, now Dr. Hany is exposing the mechanisms of how this happened, and he's doing it in a very, very scientific manner. And if you do not listen to him in a systematic manner, as if you were a grad student working hard on your master's and PhD thesis, you won't get it. You just won't get it because you don't have how shall I say, you don't have the tools. You don't have the intellectual tools. You don't have sufficient knowledge to understand the system that he's using. When he's talking about locution, this is nothing new. It's not new. The Abrahamic locution is not new. The usage of imaginative terms in the Old Testament is called the arcana. And what that means is it means hidden meaning. And the Quran itself tells you that Allah used hidden meanings and several layers of them. This is what the Samawat are. There's at least 7 layers of them, of hidden meanings. No one has attempted to understand those realms. And when they do attempt to understand, they still attempt to understand in terms of material realms. They still attempt to understand it in literal terms. So much so that you get a flat earth with 7 layers on top of it. You know, this is stupid. This is foolish. And when theories like that are put forth, they're purposely inserted into the Islamic narrative to make Muslims look stupid and foolish. And I'm telling you, it works because I've met people who would otherwise take a serious look at Islam, who, for reasons like that and others, people who understand the Abrahamic locution in the Al-Torah will not look at Islam seriously for this reason alone. They say, I can't take these Muslims seriously, you see. So scientists will never take Islam seriously unless they have a gift given to them of discernment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that allows them to pursue science and to ignore street Muslims who are operating at a very stupid, ignorant, foolish level. Okay, because of the bias of traditions. And Dr. Hany is exposing this systematically, and I have not yet heard him make any serious error. I don't agree with everything that he said, but that's only because his study is incomplete, and he admits that. He never says that I'm absolutely certain about this. He said, but that's what the evidence indicates. It's a working hypothesis. And so when you have a working hypothesis in a scientific discipline, you have to study that. You have to do what Brother Kamal said a couple of weeks ago in the comments on the forum. Well, I want to repeat this method. You see, any man of discernment, any woman of discernment will want to do that. They'll want to take a scientific perspective, and they'll want to take the same conditions, the same environment, the same words, and look at it and see if they can come to the same conclusions. You see, now I did this with Al Torah, and lo and behold, that was almost 20 years ago when I first wrote the the first rudimentary drafts of Trinity. I came across this locution in my study of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's no doubt in my mind. And I had to go through this very same uh, method that Dr. Hany used. Only the difference is that between him and my approach was I had access to all kinds of books, and I used these books, the lexicons and dictionaries, the Greek, the Latin, the English, and the Hebrew, you see. And I cross-referenced all of them when I was approaching these things, and I found gross errors in the translation and in the interpretation of what is in Al Torah according to Musa. You see, and I found the same symbols that Al Quran uses: fruit, tree, root, leaves, water. All of these things are used in Al Torah in the very same way that they're used in Al Quran. Some slight modifications because you have a different time and a different season, and Al Quran was revealed to us so that it would absolutely withstand such corruption if it is studied on its own without reference to the Hadith. Now, what people are doing is they're referencing the Hadith first, and then they're looking at the Quran. And that's an error. That's a major error. And there are some translations and how shall I say it, interpretations which are grossly negligent on the part of so-called Islamic scholars. Okay. And Dr. Hany has proven this. But if you listen to him just a little bit here and a little bit there, and then no, you won't get it. You won't understand it. You have to study him as if you're working for your PhD course. You have to be an academic here in order to do this. And the Quran says this is what you have to do. You have to be very diligent. Now, the scholars have not been diligent. They have not been diligent. Dr. Hany has given several examples of where scholars have simply copied tafsir from another scholar, generation after generation, without examining the original language, and they have applied Persian and street Arabic, Persian language and street Arabic to the Quranic Arabic, and they're not the same. They're not the same at all. I know this. I knew this years ago because I spent time with a brother, Professor Dr. Hassan. I can't remember his entire name, but he was a professor of Arabic and English literature, and he told me face to face in the course of several conversations I had with him that street Arabic is not the same as the Quranic Arabic, and you can't compare the two. And he was the appointed expert in this at ISTAC, which was the highest graduate Islamic institution in Malaysia at the time. God rest his soul. So Dr. Hany has proven this to me. And I have had access to no other Islamic scholar who does this in such a manner. I have everybody offering opinions based on tafsirs that were written 800, 1,000, 1,200 years ago, based on traditions that were imposed by Jews and Persians. And I know from my own study of the occult, which I have placed in my books, and soon in the campfire talks, you will be able to see this very clearly because I give lectures a bit like Dr. Hany, not so academic, but in that realm, because I want to be more inclusive. That a group of Jews and a group of Persians, they were called the Magi. Some of them called them Sabians. This is even mentioned in the Quran. They imposed certain words and certain misdirections in the interpretation of the Quran in both the tafsir and in translations. And they did this on purpose. Okay? It's not that the Quran isn't protected, it's protected. But the political realm was not protected. And that's where this is taking place, in the political realm, because that's the exercise of power. Now, the Muslims were supposed to exercise power according to the divine order and according to what the Quran truly says, but they didn't do this. And the proof of that is the fact that they crossed the Euphrates, that it became an imperial initiative. That's what they did. Arabs took over the world. That's not what the promise to Abraham was. And just because Muhammad said they were going to do it doesn't mean that was God's will. That's man's will. That's the will of the nafs. It's not the will. It's not the divine will. And how do I know this? Well, Brother Kamal, if you're, for example, if you're a Baptist Christian and I come and we're doing business and you invite me to supper and we enter into a conversation, and in that conversation, something I says convinces you to become a Muslim, does that give me the right to assume authority in your household? Of course not. But that's what the Arabs did. And anyone who wants to argue that point is a fool. And they're blinded by the same bias that has blinded people from really and totally understanding the Quran. And I, for one, am sick of that bias, and I don't want to be associated with these people anymore because they're on their way to the fire. The Quran makes that very clear. It makes it very, very clear. It's abundantly clear. Dr. Hany has opened up the Quran to someone like myself who is a non-Arabist, and I can't comprehend the Arabic, but his translations, his interpretation of the Quran allows me to see what I already knew was there. He confirms it. He confirms my suspicion. And believe me, I'm a doctor, okay? And a doctor means detective. Because a real doctor has to study you to get to the cause of the disease. Most of you don't know real doctors. You know these postmodern educated fools who run around in a white jacket and hang a stethoscope around them and act like doctors, okay? No, a real doctor is the detective. He gets to the root of the disease and then he provides the cure. And the Quran says there's a cure for everything. Allah has made it so. So where are these doctors? Well, they're not amongst the Muslims. I can tell you that. The Muslim doctors I met in Malaysia were amongst the worst lot I've ever come across. The worst lot of hypocrites and pretentious people I've ever come across. No. I'm a detective, you see. And I was given jobs by academics when I was in Imran Hussein gave me a job, okay? He said, well, you're a doctor, you're a detective. Go find out how this mass mind control works. And I wrote the book. I wrote the paper on it. It's in my new book called Trust. I wrote that paper. I established it. Not because I'm an expert, but because I'm a detective, okay? And A real detective is like a newspaper writer. They're detectives as well. Their job is to suss out the truth of a matter. Muslims have not been doing this. They've been lazy. They've been lackadaisical, especially the scholars. They've just been handing down generation after generation after generation the same old sodden muddy waters. That's what Zulkarnain is about. That's what the sun setting in the muddy waters is about. It's about a lack of discernment and truth that has been muddied up with man's opinions. That's what it means. And that's what Dr. Hany is revealing. You see, this is something that goes beyond what most Muslims are capable of comprehending. Now, some of our younger generation, such as you who are in attendance here, you want to know these things. And if you want to know them, and if you're listening to me right now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the discernment and the capability and the tools that you need to open these doors of greater understanding and enter the samawat. Enter the samawat in connection with true guidance, not with this foolish nonsense that had people going to the mosque every Friday, standing 6 feet apart after they jam-packed themselves in a bloody van just to drive there. That shows you how stupid people are. And you want to pray behind these leaders? Not me. Not me, brother. Not me, sister. No more. I'm finished with them. You hear? And I praise to the high heavens people like Dr. Hany, and there's another fellow named Dr. Kasif Khan, and I'm sure there are other scholars who are yet to be recognized because they've been marginalized by traditionalists, whether they're Sunni or whether they're Shia or whatever persuasion they might be. Of those 72 sects, there's only one sect that is going to make it to Jannah. And you can make it to Jannah here and now in this life by understanding the other dimensions of what is in the Holy Quran. And I praise Dr. Hany and people like him to high heavens for doing this. And I will be their champion. I will be their champion. Even if I don't understand the Arabic, doesn't matter. I understand the history of the occult evil institutions and how they have done what they have done. And I'm telling you right now, they have done the same thing to Islam. They have done the same thing to Islam. And people who are fighting this kind of, how shall I say, this kind of elucidation, this kind of knowledge, which is now coming to us through people like Dr. Hany, they are only fighting it because they are trying to protect their butts, just like my academic fellows protected their butts by keeping their mouths silent when I was called on the carpet for telling the truth. And I don't want to have anything to do with these people. No. And I don't care. I won't listen to comments. I won't enter into debates, nothing of that nature. You just get out of my way because Dr. Omar is coming in defense of this new understanding of the Quran. And I'm sure it's not new. I'm sure that there are, I asked people when I was in the academic world as an alim, I said, where I'm sure that there are books that have not been translated, nobody's read them. They're lying around gathering dust or they've been destroyed. You know, why? I'm sure I've asked several Sufis, I said, what happened to Islam? Something happened to Islam, and none of them can tell me what the problem is. Because Islam is not at fault. Men are at fault. Muslims are at fault. The women who suckle them are at fault for putting up with their nonsense, for pretending that they're pious when in fact they're not. How can you be pious when you're following a lie? Allah doesn't have any patience for liars. No. God forbid. And God does forbid it, you see. Oh, am I starting to preach now? Yes, I think I am. Alhamdulillah.